In 1837, a young woman named Aurore Dupin walked into a Paris publisher's office with a manuscript. She was talented, genuinely, remarkably talented. But she was also a woman in 19th century France, which meant that no matter what she wrote, it would be received through that lens first. Dismissed, patronized, or simply not taken seriously at all. So she made a decision. She didn't fight the system directly. She didn't write angry manifestos about the constraints placed on women. She did something far more strategic. She invented a man. She published under the name George Sand, wore men's clothing, smoked cigars, moved through the intellectual circles of Paris with an ease that her female identity would never have permitted. Critics praised her work. Publishers competed for it. She became one of the most celebrated writers of her era, while conducting passionate affairs as a woman in private, on her own terms, completely invisible to the people who thought they knew exactly who George Sand was. She didn't just change her name, she engineered a new identity from the ground up. And through that identity, she accessed a world that had been closed to her entirely. That is Law 25 of the 48 Laws of Power: recreate yourself. And it is, I would argue, the most personally confronting law in the entire book. Most people never question the identity they're living inside. You grow up in a particular family, a particular environment. You're told certain things about who you are: smart or shy, creative or practical, the funny one or the serious one. Other people's expectations layer on top of those early stories. Social roles accumulate. And at some point, without really deciding to, you start performing a version of yourself that was largely written by other people. Greene's argument is that this is a form of passive surrender. Not dramatic, not obvious, but surrender nonetheless. You handed the authorship of your own character to the people and circumstances around you. And now you're performing their script, probably without even realizing it. Law 25 says stop, take the pen back, become a conscious architect of who you are and how you are perceived. This is not about being fake. That's the misreading people jump to immediately. Greene is making a more sophisticated point. He's saying that everyone is performing an identity. The only question is whether you're performing one you chose or one that was chosen for you. The person who insists they're just being authentic is often the most thoroughly conditioned of all. They've simply never examined the conditioning. The first step in self-recreation, according to Greene, is self-awareness. Specifically, the awareness of yourself as an actor, not in a cynical sense, in a functional one. You are always presenting a version of yourself to the world. Always, the question is whether that presentation is deliberate or accidental. Once you see that clearly, everything becomes malleable. Your appearance, your manner, the way you enter a room, the pace at which you speak, the emotions you display, and the ones you keep private. All of it is adjustable. All of it sends signals. All of it shapes how people respond to you, which shapes what becomes available to you. The second step is building what Greene calls a memorable character. Not just a polished version of what you already are. Something more deliberate than that. Something that compels attention, that stands out against the noise of everyone else doing the same thing in the same way. This is where game theory becomes interesting. In any environment where attention is a limited resource, the ability to command it is a genuine competitive advantage. And attention doesn't flow equally. It flows toward what is distinctive, surprising, and slightly larger than life. Think about the people you remember, the ones who left an impression. Almost universally, they had something, a quality, a manner, a characteristic that was unmistakably theirs. Not necessarily louder or more aggressive than everyone else. Just more defined, more intentional. There was a coherent signal where other people were just noise. Greene points to Julius Caesar as the master of this. Caesar understood that leadership wasn't just about military genius or political maneuvering, it was about the projection of an almost mythic self. He staged dramatic public announcements, wore purple robes when others wore white, rode the largest horse on any battlefield so that his soldiers could always locate him as a focal point, a symbol, something larger than an ordinary man. Even his death, pulling his toga over his face as he fell, was performed with theatrical precision. Caesar shaped not just how he lived, but how he would be remembered. He authored his own legend in real time. That's an extreme example. But the principle scales down to every level. The colleague who always seems to command the room without raising their voice. The entrepreneur whose personal brand is so clear that you'd recognize their thinking even without a name attached. The leader whose entrance into a meeting visibly shifts the energy. These are people who have consciously or not applied this law. Now here's the piece that most summaries of this law completely ignore, and it's the piece that connects directly to game theory. Recreating yourself is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing strategic process. The trap is calcification. You build an identity, it works, and then you stop adjusting. You let what was once a deliberate construction become a fixed thing. And fixed things are predictable. Predictable things lose their power to command attention. And once you've lost attention, you've lost the primary resource this law is designed to accumulate. In game theory terms, a strategy that becomes perfectly readable to everyone around you stops being effective. Your opponents, and in this context, competitors, colleagues, rivals, anyone in your environment can now model your behavior completely. They know what you'll do before you do it. Your moves lose their impact because they carry no information. The surprise is gone. The perfect application of Law 25 keeps something fluid, not erratic. That reads as instability, which is a different problem. But fluid, capable of evolution, the identity is strong enough to be recognizable and distinctive, but not so rigid that it becomes a cage. George Sand changed her character periodically so the public wouldn't grow bored. Caesar constantly found new theatrical gestures to refresh his image. The underlying self remained consistent, but the presentation evolved. That combination, a coherent core with a dynamic surface, is what keeps people perpetually slightly off balance in the best possible way. There's an uncomfortable implication buried in all of this. If identity is something you construct and perform, then the story most people tell themselves about authenticity gets complicated. We're taught that the goal is to find your true self and express it honestly, to stop performing, to just be. Greene pushes back on this hard. He's essentially arguing that the concept of a fixed, authentic self that exists independent of how it's perceived is a comfortable fiction. You are in part what you project. And what you project is always received through the filters of other people's expectations, biases, and prior experiences. Given that, the choice isn't between performing and not performing. It's between performing consciously or unconsciously, between authoring your identity or inheriting it. And the person who refuses to engage with this, who insists on just being themselves, unfiltered, unedited, take it or leave it, is making a choice. It's just usually an expensive one. They're ceding control of one of the most powerful variables available to them. Aurore Dupin understood this instinctively. The world had a fixed role ready for her, and that role came with a ceiling. So she built a new one. Not a lie exactly, more like a strategic expansion of what was possible. George Sand didn't replace who she was. He made space for more of what she was actually capable of. The reversal to this law is worth sitting with, because Greene is unusually direct about it. There's no clean escape from this one. Most laws in the 48 have a reversal, a situation where the law doesn't apply, or where transgressing it serves you better. Law 25 doesn't really have one. Greene's position is that everyone is always performing. The only question again is the quality of the performance. Being overly dramatic backfires, it tips from compelling into absurd, and people stop taking you seriously. Being too rigid backfires, your identity becomes a limitation rather than a tool. But somewhere in between those failure modes is a deliberate, evolving, powerfully projected self that opens doors rather than closing them. The people who resist this most strongly are often the ones most in need of it. The person who has been unconsciously performing someone else's idea of them for 20 years and calls it authenticity. The person whose identity was shaped entirely by where they grew up, who their parents were, what group they belong to, and who has never once asked whether that identity serves the life they actually want. This law is an invitation, probably the most personally powerful invitation in the entire book. The character you are living inside, did you write it? Or did you just inherit it and forget to examine it? What does this look like in practice? It starts smaller than most people expect. It's not about reinventing everything at once. That reads as instability and tends to confuse and alienate the people around you. It starts with awareness, noticing which aspects of how you present yourself feel deliberate and which feel automatic. noticing which parts of your identity open doors and which ones quietly close them, noticing where you're performing someone else's script. Then it becomes intentional addition. What quality, if you amplified it, would make you more memorable? What manner, if you adopted it, would shift how you're received? What is the distance between who you are in your best moments and who you consistently present to the world, and how do you close that gap? Caesar didn't reinvent himself overnight. He refined and amplified over time, adding theatrical gestures and symbolic choices that compounded into a legendary identity. George Sand started with a name and a manuscript and built an entire persona from there. The medium doesn't matter. The principle is identical across all of them. You are not a fixed thing. You are a work in progress, whether you treat it that way or not. Law 25 says treat it that way, on purpose, with intention, with the understanding that the self you project to the world is one of the most powerful strategic assets you possess. Most people leave it on autopilot their entire lives. The question this law asks is simple. Why would you do that?